Uh-oh.
Good morning, Citizen Peterson.
You got a short one?
Yeah, I do.
I mean, a question?
Saved the best question for last. Trust me, this one's good. But first, I'll break the ice. Many people have stated no icebreaker. You want me to get right into the real question?
I want you to get right into the question. All right.
So this question is about hypercritical thinking.
Yep.
Now, everyone knows that critical thinking is a great thing to develop. You have to be able to, I guess, think about your ideas. So if information is presented to you, you have to decide if it's legitimate or if there's some sort of deceit behind it. But when it's taken to its extreme, no matter how great or noble somebody is, you can always find a crack in the armor and try to figure out how they're covering up something that's not great about them, you know? And you might then discredit everything they do as just a facade.
Okay, so let me stop you there for a sec, because I want to address two of the issues that you already brought up. So there's the issue of hypercritical thinking, partly in relationship to yourself and partly in relationship to others. So I'd like to address the issue with regards to yourself to begin with. So there's this idea that Carl Jung developed. He extracted it, I don't know from where, from some ancient writings that he was familiar with. I believe they were Jewish writings. He said that, classically speaking, traditionally speaking, God was viewed to rule being with two hands, the right hand and the left hand, and the right hand was justice, and that was you're going to get what's coming to you. But the left hand was mercy. And the idea essentially was that the cosmos could not exist without the proper combination of justice and mercy. You should get what's coming to you. But people are fallible and they make mistakes. And so it's reasonable to apply that to yourself. You know, there's an idea that's been developed by psychologists over the last few decades that people are basically narcissistic and that they generally feel that they're better at most things than other people. I don't buy that. I don't think the experimental evidence for that is very strong, and I certainly haven't seen that, for example, in my clinical practice, where I've seen that people are generally far harder on themselves than they are on other people. One example of that, I've written about this in my new book too, is that, you know, if you have a pet that's sick and you take it to the vet and you get medication, you're very likely to give the pet the entire course of medication, to go to the pharmacy to get the prescription filled, to give the pet the medication, to follow it through. But if you are the person who has the problem, yeah, you all laugh because you know the story. It's like a third of you won't even go fill the prescription, and of the remaining 2/3 of you, half won't take it to completion. And you think, well, why are people like that? And I think it's because they know themselves, they have contempt for themselves because of their flaws, and then they come to despise themselves. And I think that's a big mistake. That's too much justice and not enough mercy. And you know, Jung wrote about the biblical injunction that you should treat your neighbor as if he were yourself, essentially. But he talked about that as an equation, which was quite interesting. So, because it's often read as something like you should be nice to people, which is not what it means at all. Because first, nice is a very low-end virtue, but it isn't what it means. What it means is that you should treat your neighbor as if he or she is someone that you wish to encourage and develop, but that you should also have exactly the same attitude towards yourself, which is sort of in some sense regardless of what your opinion is of yourself. Critical, let's say, hypercritical even, which is often the case with people who are anxious or perhaps who are hyperconscientious. You have to put forward to yourself the same sympathy, we could say, that you would extend to someone else that you cared for. That's the thing, is that you have to come to treat yourself as if you're someone that you care for. And I mean that technically. You know, you detach yourself from yourself and you think, okay, well, if I was going to construct a mode of being that was optimal for this person that I happen to be, what would that look like? And that's sort of independent of whether or not you think you deserve it. It's like, maybe you deserve it and maybe you don't. Innocent until proven guilty, that's a pretty good policy. But you should come to lay out a mode of being for yourself that gives you some credit, you know, and that will also help you in your dealings with other people, but it's often very difficult for people to do that to themselves. Okay, so that's the first part of that.
Okay. Perfect. So it starts out with this hypercritical thinking, and you talk a lot about Nietzsche's assertion about the death of God. but I see it sort of more like a willful destruction of the heroic ideal. And I guess several months ago I had occasion to look up a definition or explanation for the zeitgeist of modern victimhood outrage culture. And I sought in this particular case, and I found. And this paragraph, okay, this has what you call the rhythmic cadence that just made my hair stand up on its ends. And if you could look at it and read this, this is better than the last one.
The image of man that dominates in modern literature, in visual arts, cinema, and theater is primarily a gloomy image. The great and the noble are suspect from the outset. They must be torn from their pedestal so that one can see through them. Morality counts as hypocrisy and joy as self-deception. Anyone who simply puts trust in the beautiful and the good is either inexcusably ingenuous or acting with evil intent. The truly moral attitude is suspicion, and its greatest success is in exposing. Criticism of society is obligatory. It is impossible to find words lurid and brutal enough to describe the dangers that threaten us. This delight in the negative is not, however, unlimited. There exists at the same time an obligation to be optimistic, and the failure to observe this obligation does not go unpunished. For example, anyone who expresses the view that not everything in the intellectual development of the modern period has been correct, that it is necessary in some essential areas to reflect on the shared wisdom of the great cultures, has chosen to make the wrong kind of criticism. He finds himself suddenly confronted with a resolute apologia for the fundamental decisions of the modern age. No matter how much delight one may take in negation, he is not permitted to call into question the view that the fundamental trajectory of historical development is progress and that the good lies in the future and nowhere else. You know, I thought a lot about nihilism, let's say, and its justification. And I think that a very powerful justification for nihilism can be found in the mere observation that life is rife with tragedy and malevolence, of which there is no doubt. But then I've got suspicious of that rationale for nihilism over the years, because a counterposition to it emerged. And this is something Nietzsche, of course, concentrated on as well, that had more to do with resentment. It's like, you can imagine negation of the heroic ideal from despair, from the despair, say, produced by tragedy and by exposure to malevolence. But it's completely and delightfully irresponsible to negate the heroic ideal, because it means that you don't have any responsibility. And it seems to me that if you're nihilistic and prone to criticize the heroic foundation of, let's say, Western culture, that one of the first questions that you could ask yourself is, well, what makes you so sure that you're appropriately cynical, suspicious, and critical, and not just running away as fast as you possibly can from every bit of responsibility that you could possibly adopt? And I think that that's a perfectly reasonable perspective, and I think that that is reflected to some degree in what the person who wrote this paragraph was attempting to.
Can you guess who it was who wrote that paragraph?
No, I can't.
Really?
No.
I left you a hint at the...
Who was it?
Cardinal Ratzinger. Come on.
Ah.
There it is.
All right, I'm going to take another question.
And well done.